Welcome to Accommodate This, and happy World Autism Acceptance Day. As many of you know, April is Autism Acceptance Month, and the first week of April, including any days from March that might be part of the same week, is Autism Awareness Week. And April 2nd is World Autism Awareness Day. There's also June 18th, which is Autism Pride Day, November 1st, which is Autistic Speaking Day, and the second Sunday in February, which is the International Day of Prayer for Autism Spectrum Disorders, also known as Autism Sunday. There's even been an Autism Awareness Year and a Decade for Disability. These and other campaigns have been established around the world to raise awareness and acceptance of autism and people with disabilities. But where did these all start? What are they trying to accomplish? And have they been successful? Those and other questions are what I want to tackle today. And now that you know why we're here, let's get into the topic for this video: World Autism Acceptance. Anymore, it seems like every day is a designated day of awareness for something. But awareness days are not a new thing. The first awareness day was National Women's Day, singular, on February 28th, 1909, which was celebrated on the last Sunday in February until 1913. Then in 1914 and beyond, it's been celebrated in various parts of the world on or around March 8th. The rumor has it that the first celebration in March was commemorating a protest by women garment workers that occurred on March 8th, 1857, but this is believed to be a myth. In 1946, the women's rights organization known as Congress of American Women was founded, but dissolved in 1950 due to pressures from the Communist Party. And the National Society for Autistic Children was founded in 1965, but later changed their name to the Autism Society of America, or ASA, to emphasize that autistic children grow up to be autistic adults. Here's when we start to see the women's rights movement intertwining with the autistic rights movement. International Women's Day, plural, was pretty much forgotten in the United States until 1967, and then gained popularity in 1969 after a march in Berkeley, California. The ASA established National Autistic Children's Week in 1970, which later evolved into Autism Awareness Month. Although the ASA is still around today, there was a period when they promoted pseudoscience and false conspiracies about vaccines and autism, which has led to many deaths and irreparable damage around the world. Nevertheless, they are credited for starting Autism Awareness Month. And the United Nations began celebrating International Women's Day in 1975, and then made it an official day of awareness in 1977. While women's rights are an important issue, that is not the topic for this video, but we cannot forget to recognize that movement as the inspiration for international days of recognition and acceptance. With that said, about the time when women's rights were gaining popularity in the United States, awareness for autism was growing as well. In 1976, the United Nations held a human rights conference where they designated 1981 as the International Year of Disabled Persons and focused on initiatives outlined from the 1976 conference. Now, the outcome of that year-long effort was the creation of the World Program of Action Concerning Disabled Persons, which is a document outlining several issues plaguing disabled populations around the world and initiatives designed to address those issues. It also emphasizes the need to approach disability from a human rights perspective rather than from a medical and disease perspective. In order to allow time for countries to implement the initiatives within the World Program of Action, the General Assembly proclaimed 1983 to 1992 the United Nations Decade of Disabled Persons. Rumor has it that President Ronald Reagan officially declared April as National Autism Awareness Month in 1988, though I could not find any official documentation to support this. So that's a thing. Additionally, the movie Rain Man released at the end of that same year, which was about a man with savant syndrome. While that movie did a lot to propel the term autism into the public sphere, it is a work of fiction that does not accurately reflect all individuals with savant syndrome or autism. And it served as the main source of reference for autism to most Americans for years, stoking fears and further stigmatizing the condition, while robbing actually autistic individuals of validation because they didn't match the stereotypes exaggerated in the film. In the year 2000, the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, were adopted by the United Nations. These were a set of 8 international developmental goals aimed at addressing extreme poverty, hunger, disease, and other pressing issues by the year 2015. Here's a breakdown of the MDGs. The first goal is to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. Second goal, achieve universal primary education. Third, promote gender equality and empower women. Goal 4, reduce child mortality. 5, improve maternal health. 6, combat HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. 7, ensure environmental sustainability. And 8, develop a global partnership for development. While none of these goals were autism-specific, autism was on the periphery for several of these goals. For instance, many autistics have been forced into extreme poverty. Autistic children were being denied access to proper education. At the time, autism was considered a condition similar to a disease to be cured, and fears of autism contributed to child mortality rates and so on. On September 16, 2005, the General Assembly of the United Nations met to revisit their resolutions. Page 28 of the summary from that meeting had a small paragraph about disability initiatives that says, "We recognize the need for persons with disabilities to be guaranteed full enjoyment of their rights without discrimination. We also affirm the need to finalize a comprehensive draft convention on the rights of persons with disabilities." Now, they held a draft convention December 6, 2006, regarding the rights of persons with disabilities. The draft developed during that convention was an inspiration for World Autism Awareness Day. But what I find most interesting is how many previous initiatives were cited during that convention. I've included them here, along with the years when they were created. And this emphasizes just how many times organizations and world leaders have attempted to address the issues affecting human rights prior to 2006. Now, one important thing to note is that the United States played an active role in drafting of the resolutions on the rights of the child in 1989 and signed it on February 16, 1995. However, the United States has never ratified it due to opposition from conservative organizations such as the Heritage Foundation, who said, "A civil society in which moral authority is exercised by religious congregations, family, and other private associations is fundamental to the American order." And the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, who argued that the Convention on the Rights of the Child threatens homeschooling. Fast forward to 2007, and the United Nations General Assembly finally designated April 2nd as World Autism Awareness Day. And this was recorded in Resolution A-Res 62-139, which was adopted on December 18, 2007. That resolution is what established World Autism Awareness Day as an annual event beginning in 2008. So in 2008, the first World Autism Awareness Day took place almost a century after the first Acceptance Day celebration. And since then, hundreds of awareness days have been established nationally and internationally by the United Nations and other organizations. And while it's important to draw attention to important issues, It's become almost counterproductive to have so many. After all, when public attention is being drawn from one issue to the next, nobody is spending enough time on any one issue to accomplish anything substantial. More about that later. The focus of the 2008 World Autism Awareness Day was on highlighting the need to improve the quality of life for individuals with autism and promoting their full inclusion and participation in society. Now, this is a target that gets repeated over and over again, but is still lacking to this day. It's like wishful thinking that never gets the practical backing it needs to make a difference. These events have done very little to impact change, but have served more as propaganda and fundraising events that exploit public pity to line the pockets of people who have no intention of improving circumstances for autistics. And that will become more apparent as we go along. The focus of the 2009 World Autism Awareness Day was on promoting greater understanding and support for individuals with autism, with a specific call to action for governments to enhance support services like early intervention and access to education and employment. While education has improved our understanding of autism, enabling us to easier identify and diagnose it, support services, including better education for autistic children and employment opportunities, are still lacking. The focus of the 2010 World Autism Awareness Day was to affirm and promote the full realization of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for autistic people, with the focus on combining research and awareness-raising efforts to ensure protection, support, and full membership in an inclusive society. This was sort of a combination of the 2008 and 2009 themes, but little more than raising awareness has occurred. We are still the most marginalized members of society, experiencing high degrees of discrimination, poverty, unemployment, poor physical and mental health, and homelessness. The focus of the 2011 World Autism Awareness Day was toward autonomy and self-determination. The initial focus for these yearly events was on raising awareness about autism and promoting early diagnosis and intervention. But by 2011, it had shifted beyond autism awareness to appreciation and acceptance of those with autism and the fantastic contributions we make to society. This was a big turning point that came from paradigm shifts among scientists who began to realize that looking for ways to prevent autism was the wrong approach. Also in 2011, the Autism Self-Advocacy Network began referring to April as Autism Acceptance Month, as opposed to Awareness Month, promoting not just education and awareness, but also understanding and respect for people with autism spectrum disorder as people capable of living full and meaningful lives. The focus of the 2012 World Autism Awareness Day was launch of official UN awareness raising stamp. This was the most blatant example that World Autism Awareness Day was more about propaganda than about change. The art on the stamps was created by individuals diagnosed as autistic, and the hope was to simply raise awareness of the condition, but it did little more than show some people that some of us had artistic abilities. And yet it did nothing to explain what autism is, our challenges, or how people can help. The focus of the 2013 World Autism Awareness Day was celebrating the ability within the disability of autism. Again, we're trying to get people to appreciate us without any practical advances in interventions. That was the same year when Asperger's syndrome was combined with autism spectrum disorders in the DSM-5. The prevalence numbers of both conditions were now combined, a move that gave conspiracy theorists and the ignorant justification to spread more fear about autism, saying it was becoming more prevalent. The focus of the 2014 World Autism Awareness Day was opening doors to inclusive education. That same year, The Combating Autism Reauthorization Act of 2006 was renamed to the Autism Collaboration, Accountability, Research, Education, and Support Act of 2014, or the Autism Cares Act of 2014. The latest version of this bill authorizes roughly $2 billion annually to autism research and interventions. The focus of the 2015 World Autism Awareness Day was employment, the autism advantage. Now, it should be noted that 2015 was the deadline for the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, that the UN established in 2000. By this point, the UN had made substantial progress, but they fell short of fully achieving all of their targets, with some goals like cutting extreme poverty in half being largely realized, while others like maternal mortality reduction facing slower progress. At the same time, efforts to reduce poverty for autistics had yet to see any progress. Even to this day, autistics face 85% unemployment and underemployment, as opposed to 7.5% unemployment for other disabled adults, and 3.8% unemployment for everyone else. So while advancements were made for the majority, little still has been done for the benefit of autistics in the employment sector. The focus of the 2016 World Autism Awareness Day was Autism and the 2030 Agenda, Inclusion and Neurodiversity. Basically, with 2015 goals being mostly achieved, the UN reassessed where work was left to be completed and recommitted to achieve 17 sustainable development goals by 2030. None of these were specific to autism. These goals are shown here. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. All of these goals are important and respectful. Some of them are even arguably more important than autism awareness and advocacy. In fact, I encourage you to read more about them in the Sustainable Development Goals that I linked in the description below this video. However, like all previous goals from the United Nations, they pretty much leave it up to each country or state to figure out how to achieve these goals. And unfortunately, for those of us in the United States, our government seems to have little desires to do anything productive to help the autistic community. Trump was president over the next 4 years, which delivered next to nothing worth mentioning about improvements for the autistic community. The focus of the 2017 World Autism Awareness Day was toward autonomy and self-determination. 2018 was empowering women and girls with autism. 2019 was assistive technologies and active participation. And 2020 was the transition to adulthood. But not only did Trump do nothing to help the autistic community during his first term, he attempted to leave the UN during that time. So it's no surprise nothing really came about from the 4 events that took place during his first term. Ironically, spending for researching the biology behind autism went up significantly under Trump's first term. The purple line in this graph shows that funding for services and supports has remained relatively level and has been one of the least funded objectives for autism research between 2008 and 2020. And although experts say that interventions are important, funding in that area has decreased. The focus of the 2021 World Autism Awareness Day was inclusion in the workplace. At that time, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, many human rights organizations pushed to move beyond awareness and into acceptance. The Autism Society officially adopted the name of Autism Acceptance Month instead of Autism Awareness Month in 2021, and that's a full decade from the point when they first began using the terminology. Newly appointed President Joe Biden reversed Trump's withdrawal request from the UN as well, recognizing how important it is that the United Nations remain an active participant in global peace and prosperity efforts. The focus of the 2022 World Autism Awareness Day was inclusive quality education for all. Also in 2022, the U.S. House Report 117-96 designates large amounts of money for autism research in several ways. Unfortunately, as we see more often than not, the majority of the funds are intended to be used to understand the causes of autism and ways to prevent autism from developing, which is exactly the opposite of accepting autistics. Instead of addressing the abuse and the separation of classes, they'd rather just figure out how to eradicate our existence or force us to assimilate. And this is the biggest issue facing autistics, that aulistics still think all the changes need to be made on our part, and we are to be held down unless we prove ourselves worthy of existing. Even when reviewing the details of the House Report Bill 117-96, we see that there's very little about addressing attitudes of aulistics. We are still treated like a disease to be eradicated. We are still treated as problematic and enigmatic. Research is less about understanding and offering supports, and more about curing the scourge that is autism. Now, here are some of the details. They designated $57,344,000 for identification and treatment of autism and other developmental disorders. Another $38,245,000 for training professionals to screen, diagnose, and provide evidence-based interventions. The bill encourages the CDC to consider possible causes of autism such as tuberous sclerosis complex, or TSC, and neurofibromatosis. It points out that there are several critical areas of need, including long wait lists for services, the services cliff experienced after high school, workforce shortages, service delivery, services for older adults, as well as racial, ethnic, and geographic disparities in access to quality autism services and care. It commits the health department to ascertain which services are most effective, how to strengthen them, and how these services can assist autistics. The bill also allows an additional $80 million to go toward initiatives related to individuals with Down syndrome, including autistics who have Down syndrome. And lastly, to help disseminate research and best practices to local education agencies, or LEAs, and state education agencies, or SEAs, regarding services and improving results for children with autism. Of course, this could only be done once it's been determined which services are most effective and how. The focus of the 2023 World Autism Awareness Day was transforming the narrative, contributions at home, at work, in the arts, and in policymaking. Even as late as 2023, we were still trying to prove our worth to the rest of society. Regarding funding for services and supports, I attempted to find an updated graph to show the progress. However, even the updated report for 2021 to 2023 contained the same graph that ended in 2020. The focus of the 2024 World Autism Awareness Day was moving from surviving to thriving. This was the first time it was so boldly communicated that autistics are living in survival mode and struggling to live in society. We are dying 20 years earlier than our peers and experiencing terrible standards of living in the meantime. The number one cause of death for autistics is suicide. We are not doing well. That same year, the Public Health Service Act of 1994 was amended to include budget changes, providing more money for research and interventions throughout the autistic person's lifespan, not just childhood. What happened to that money and research is anyone's guess. The focus of the 2025 World Autism Awareness Day is advancing neurodiversity and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. As shown earlier, none of those goals are focused on autism. And yet that's the focus of World Autism Awareness Day this year. I'm not saying these goals aren't worthy of pursuit. I think they are all very important and very worthy of pursuit. I admire the United Nations efforts to spread democracy, advocate for the rights of women, to eradicate poverty, and more. But is World Autism Awareness Day just a day to promote world issues? Isn't that what Earth Day is for? I mentioned earlier that all these days of recognition make it difficult to focus on any one issue for very long, but this year it seems autism is just being overlooked entirely. At this point, it feels like the effort to have autism recognized and respected is beyond hopeless. To make matters worse, the UN is nowhere near being on track to achieve their Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. They currently have about 17% of targets reported as being on track. Overall, they are showing minimal or moderate progress, or even stalling or reversing progress for multiple targets. And that's a huge concern for the future of democracy, humanity, and the planet. But again, as important as those issues may be, they are not autism. Has autism fallen out of focus for the UN? Well, not exactly. The World Programme of Action Concerning Disabled Persons is the inspiration for the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Programme of Action groups all disabilities together into one category. So yes, the focus is off of autism specifically, but because autism is a disability, there are still initiatives to work toward that will benefit autistic people. One issue with this, though, is that different disabilities result in different needs that need to be addressed. So trying to do the minimum and expect it to benefit the majority of disabilities will inevitably result in some disabilities being completely disregarded or their needs only being partially met, if at all. For example, while there are systemic issues preventing disabled people from obtaining and retaining employment, some disabilities are not permanent. Once recovered, it can skew the results of success for permanent disabilities, making it seem like progress had been made when none actually has. It's like focusing on the 7.5% unemployment percent while ignoring the 85% unemployment rate, and then claiming to have benefited the community upon which the 85% rate is based. It just seems a bit dishonest. And reports as recent as 2024 show that the government is failing and has consistently failed to provide services and supports to meet demand, which is worsening the lives of many autistics. Considering Trump withdrew the US from the World Health Organization on January 20th, from the United Nations on February 4th, actively trying to shut down the Department of Education, actively resisting climate initiatives, and actively restricting rights and services for women, the disabled, and the LGBTQ community, we're unlikely to see any progress on these initiatives in this country for quite some time. There is a requirement to provide 12 months notice before leaving the UN, though, so we are technically still part of the UN until 2026, but only on paper. Trump also made RFK Jr. the Secretary over Health and Human Services, and charged him with investigating why autism is on the rise in this country, completely ignoring how advancements in the realm of identification and diagnosis, or combination of diagnoses into one, have contributed to the escalation of those numbers. Given RFK's record and the things both he and Trump have said in the past, it's reasonable to doubt their commitment to do anything of benefit for the disabled, let alone autistics. So what's next? Experts suggest to improve outcomes for autistics, and autistic adults especially, society needs to focus on access to quality healthcare. That's true. Support for social and emotional well-being, also true. Inclusive education and employment opportunities, true. And community integration, true. While also addressing systemic barriers and promoting understanding and acceptance. Yes, true, all true. I agree these issues need to be addressed. I think a big part of making this successful is recognizing changes have to be made in holistic standards and attitudes, not just changes among autistics. We can't move forward as long as aulistics insist on being the better communicators while remaining vague and hiding their intentions, being the bigger thinkers while remaining superficial, and being the most valid due to their sheer number. We need to get rid of the capitalist ideas of perpetually seeking more power and wealth as the only acceptable measures of success. We need society to become less selfish and adopt the values of the United Nations, which recognize that none of us are here alone. We are all part of a world order that requires participation and cooperation from all. And together we should work toward the best benefits for everyone, not just a few rich or powerful individuals or one country over another. We need to write these values on our hearts, not just express them for money-making purposes. But I fear this is the opposite of the goals of the current administration under Trump. So I don't expect any progress to be made in this regard as long as he is in power. Let's just hope that he doesn't take us too far back, that it will take decades to recover once he leaves office. Now, I don't want to leave on that troublesome note, but the situation does seem very dire for the autistic community in the United States. We've fought for equal representation and consideration for decades. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but what tiny bits of progress we've gained over the last few decades are now being threatened because Trump decided to replace expertise with ignorant people who insist on taking us back to the start. Money and greed have done less to propel us toward full societal integration and more to segregate us. The awareness we hoped for was nothing more than commentary about how terrible we are, how much of a burden we are to our families, and how big of a strain we are on the system, like a sad introduction for members of Ye Olde Freak Show. Anything positive about us has been infantilizing and pitiful. We deserve to be taken seriously and respected as human beings with a real stake in the future of this planet, not as pet projects for money launderers and conspiracy theorists. We deserve real change that actually benefits the autistic community, not just talk that raises money for everyone else. We deserve security, not efforts to secure our place as second-class citizens. We need action, not platitudes. I wish the United Nations the best in their efforts to spread democracy and freedom across the world. But don't for 1 minute think that we aren't aware what is actually happening. While we aren't the biggest concern in the world today, we don't deserve to be pushed further into the margins while our condition is exploited by those we trusted to fight for us most. Don't forget that World Autism Awareness Day is meant to be about autism and autistic rights. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, and subscribe to see more content like this, or click on the video here to continue watching.